news of the Grizzlies offseason dropped. Karna, Ja Morant is officially suspended for 25 games. Feels like old news now. It came out last Friday. But I see you nodding your head over there. How do you feel off the top when you hear that this suspension is 25 games?
Maybe I'm just a chronic pessimist. I don't know, because I said February, like 40 games probably. Dude, I'll take 25 games early December all day, right? We were at, 11-10. We had a winning record without him this year. I think Jaren and Desmond are going to improve. I think if we make some really good moves in the offseason, that record looks better. Ja got very lucky. I'll just say it like that. Like, if they told me February, I would have been hurt. Like, that would have hurt our team's chances of getting a high seed in the West. But, on the other hand, I would have probably said it's justified. 25 games, they should be thanking their lucky stars. Ja Morant's camp or whoever's around him should be telling him, we got away with one. It's time to grow up. It's time to buckle down and make this thing about basketball and nothing else. And I hope that's what happens, but I consider us lucky. And with the NBAPA being able to maybe get it down a couple games, that would also be helpful.
I disagree that this was a lucky outcome for Ja Morant. The media, and of course we are becoming part of that, Karna, but the media made it out like this was going to be a 40-game suspension. That would have been outlandish. That would have been completely unsupported by precedent. If you look at the past suspensions in NBA history, this is still the 9th longest. And the people ahead of him generally were either fighting fans or doping or committing illegal acts, committing felonies. Ja Morant did none of those three things. What he did was incredibly stupid and obviously deserved some kind of punishment from the league. But I agree with the NBA Players Association that this is still an excessive and inappropriate suspension. I understand why Adam Silver would do it, and I understand he feels betrayed by Ja Morant, who looked him in the eye and said, I won't do this again, I will be better, and then proceeded to make the exact same mistake 2 months later. And yet, to get a 25-game suspension, to miss a third of your season because of an Instagram Live video where you did nothing illegal is pretty crazy. I understand that there's a lot of context here with Ja Morant wielding guns in an unsafe manner, using violence against other people dating back to last summer with the beating up a 17-year-old allegedly, with threatening a mall cop allegedly. And all of it looks bad, and all of it shows that Ja has a lot of maturity questions to answer. Nonetheless, if we are suspending him for an incident on Instagram Live, 25 games is pretty darn excessive, and I think the Players Association has a shot to reduce this to something like 15 games. I tweeted out something, retweeting, I believe it was Sean Coleman from Bluff City Media, who looked into the history of appeals and saw that there had been some success, including a 25-game suspension for Jermaine O'Neal, dating back to Malice in the Palace, that was reduced to 15. That outcome would be great for the Grizzlies, and I also think it would be fair, given that what Ja is being suspended for is an Instagram Live video. And I just don't think that squares with for me, that doesn't square with him missing a third of the season.
Yeah, I actually disagree with you. I think that 25 games is lucky because I think you're looking at the suspension in a vacuum. Which, if you want to say that's a fair way to look at it, that's fine. But if you look at it from a pattern of behavior, whether it goes from lying to the front, like to Adam Silver and Joe Dumars in New York City to their face, or wherever it was, to their face, to the 17-year-old incident, to the Pacers incident, to his first suspension, then making the exact same mistake again on May 13th, like, all of these should have a compounding effect on the suspension. Otherwise, you're not learning anything. Like, that's my whole point, is that and now with like reports from, I think it's Bleacher Report, that said like Ja Morant feels like attacked by the league. This is all, I don't know. I think the media, I think part of the media is also feeding into the narrative that Ja Morant is somehow a victim in all of this. I don't believe that to be true. So I think if you look at the pattern of behavior, I think Adam Silver wanted to send a strong message to a young player in the league who has the potential to be the face of the league. And probably to a lot of younger kids is the face of the league. So you have to make sure his behavior is representative of the league. And I think we got lucky with 25 games. I think, and we're also traversing into not being able to use precedent to really unpack how this affects the NBA's image, right? Like when Jermaine O'Neal jumped into the stands, it was on cable news, sure, but what we're dealing with is, millions of people around the world seeing a guy tote a gun when gun violence is a flashpoint issue in the United States, right? Like this, again, sure, it wasn't illegal, but once you sit in front of the commissioner of the league and say, I'm not going to make this mistake again, then you make the same mistake like 2 or 3 months later, there's going to be a large suspension that you have to pay for that, and rightly so. It's time to grow up. Like, I don't really care how long the suspension is. I really don't. Like, if you believe that Ja Morant is going to be the face of the franchise for the next 10 years or however long contract you're going to have him to, it could be 40 games. Sure, let's say it's 40 games. The thing is, the return on investment that you get from that suspension is hopefully he grows up and he can be the face of your franchise moving forward. So it's not just about this season, right? Or 25 games or a fourth of a season. It's about the future of the Grizzlies franchise. And if I'm whoever in that front office that can get through to him in some way, I'm sitting them down being like, enough of the stupidity, enough of hanging out with these people that don't have your best interest in mind, enough of the victim mentality. You serve the 25 games or 15 games, you consider yourself lucky, you go be a role model and play well and bring a championship to the franchise. You don't want to be a legend like a what could have been legend. You want to be a guy who brought rings back to a city that you seemingly care about. So that's my whole rant about Ja Morant. It's like, I don't care how long the suspension is. Because if you look down 5 years down the road, hopefully it won't matter if it's 25 or 40 games. What we hope for is 2 or 3 championships. And I think we'll still be in the position, no matter when he comes back, to make a run in the Western Conference. The question is how focused he's going to be and how ready is he going to be to play. And that's really all that matters to me.
You made a lot of good points there that I absolutely agree with, even as I'm saying the suspension, in my opinion, was still too long. First of all, the report that came out about Ja Morant feeling like a victim, I can absolutely understand why he would feel that way because he's been in the news a lot for negative reasons, but all of it is self-inflicted, and all of it could have been avoided if he changed his behavior. So hopefully that is a motivator for him, even as much as the suspension is, even as much as all the millions of dollars he's lost is. Hopefully the negative attention is a motivator to be like, you know what, I don't want to be in the news for that anymore. I want to be in the news for what I was just a season before, being the breakout star of the NBA, being an all-NBA level talent. So I don't like seeing that victim mentality because that shows a lack of accountability. On the flip side, you're exactly right that this suspension, it does not matter how long it is if he truly does take accountability. The true consequences of this Ja Morant suspension, we won't know them for years because we won't know exactly how well he has learned his lesson, exactly how much better of a man he is going to be, which he said in his statement, which I actually really liked. I don't think it was written by ChatGPT this time. I'm sure that he and his PR team worked a long time on it, but I appreciated the statement, and part of it said, I promise I'm going to be a better man. I hate that Ja feels like he has to apologize for who he is and has to promise to be a better person. I feel like we're all working to be better people, but it sucks to admit that you're not the kind of person that you want to be. But I think that was a necessary statement, that he's seeing all the trouble that he's gotten into, all the different incidents that he's been involved in. And it's really been a year, basically, almost exactly a year of being in the news for the wrong reasons. And he's saying, I got to make changes. If he truly makes those changes, then 25 games missed is a drop in the bucket because the future of the Memphis Grizzlies franchise is brighter. Now, Karna, I did want to get into a few smaller consequences, or I guess more tangible consequences of the Ja Morant suspension. Number one, this is a really long suspension because he is automatically not eligible for All NBA or MVP. The new CBA requiring players to play 65 games in order to be eligible for those end of season awards is automatically locking him out of that. And I do think that's a pretty heavy price to pay, that no matter what kind of season he has coming out of the suspension, he won't be recognized as one of the 15 best players in the sport and won't be able to win one of those major awards. Do you think that aspect is fair, both between the CBA and the suspension?
Well, hopefully he gets on to 15. Then he has 67 games. So
that would be nice. Then he can only miss 2.
It's fair? Not really, but this is what I'll say on top of that. I understand it from a business perspective, from the NBA's perspective, right? Do you want a guy who may or may not have learned his lesson to be carrying the weight of the league, whether it be MVP or All NBA? I understand that. That being said, if he balls out, comes back and balls out and puts up historic numbers, I think it would be stupid not to make him the MVP, especially like, what is it, 82 minus 25? My math is gone. What, 52 games? Something? 57 games. 57. Jesus Christ. 57 games. I think that's more than enough to prove that you're the MVP of a league. Is it available or games played in?
Games played in. You have to appear at least in at least 20 minutes.
That's what I thought.
65 games.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, yeah, I think if he comes back and balls out, it would be dumb from a technicality perspective. Everyone would know that he was the MVP and the best player, which he certainly is capable of doing. Yeah, I think it's a dumb rule. Yeah, I mean, from a financial perspective, right, we don't have to pay as many incentives to him now, pretty much locked in, which is good, I guess. But, like, I would also love to see the Grizzlies have an MVP. That'd be great as a fan.
First time in franchise history. I mean, they are one of, I believe, 8 franchises to have never won MVP.
I wonder what the other ones are.
But yes, they are one of 8 franchises. But the second major consequence is more on the court, and that is heightened pressure on Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. We know Desmond Bane is going to take a heavier ball handling and playmaking responsibility. We know that Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to have to carry the scoring load more so than when Ja is available. Between those two guys, who do you think is going to face more pressure, have to step up more in Ja's absence at the start of the season?
I think there's 2 ways to look at it. The first way to look at it is Desmond Bane kind of fits the prototypical guard role better. So he might feel pressure to carry the weight as another guard, as a player that plays, obviously not the same as Ja Morant, but like they play similar roles insofar as they're like guards, right? They're guards. They need to be able to shoot, cut to the basket, make plays, playmaking ability, all of that, right? On the other hand, I think one thing we spoke about in our first couple podcasts is that Jaren Jackson has the physical tools to really be a all-star type of player consistently and put up all-star. I don't want to say MVP because that's too much, and I know he's been an all-star, but like I know like high-end star numbers, right? He has the physical tools to be doing that. And defensively, he can do that. However, offensively, he's still left more to be desired. So I think there's going to be a ton of pressure on both of them for different reasons. On top of that, I think Jaren Jackson makes more frustrating mistakes than Desmond Bane does. Insofar as the foul trouble issue, you know, this is going to sound stupid, but as a esport a big man myself, I can attest to the traveling, the unnecessary fouling, missed 3-pointers when you want them to go down low. So, like, I think there are some more frustrating aspects to Jaren Jackson Jr.'s games and higher expectations. On the other hand, I think Desmond Bane more directly will have to fill the scoring, playmaking, and basically all the things that Ja does without Ja's athleticism, without Ja's court vision, without Ja's athleticism. I said it like twice because he relies on athleticism a lot. So that I think there's two ways to look at it. If I had to guess, like, overall who's going to have more pressure, I'd say Jaren Jackson Jr. because he has the ability to be a superstar. Just hasn't turned the corner yet.
Yeah, I'm going to take the other side of it. I absolutely agree that Jaren is much more positioned to be the superstar in Ja's absence. And if we see more of what he did in Ja's first suspension, in which over a 4-game stretch there, he averaged 28 points per game and was closing games on offense and just looked like an absolutely unstoppable force down low. If that Jaren Jackson Jr. starts next season, then there is going to be MVP talk, and there is going to be first team or second team All-NBA talk for Jaren. But in terms of who is going to have to step up more, who's going to carry a heavier responsibility out of necessity, I'm looking at Desmond Bane. We're going to talk about this more, but Tyus Jones is pretty likely not going to be a Grizzly next season. If any trade they do is likely to include Tyus, and we even got reports this week that Matt Moore of Action Network said that Tyus Jones is one of the players he is most confident will be on another team next season. That he can say he's fairly confident that Tyus Jones will not be on the Grizzlies in October. So with that, Desmond Bane's already going to be kind of the backup point guard. Let's just keep out of our minds other roster changes at this point. And without Ja Morant, he's going to be almost the primary point guard, depending on who else they bring in. And I'm actually really excited about that because Desmond Bane has shown some real promise as a playmaker. His 20.2 assist percentage ranked 6th among all wings in the NBA last year. So on a per usage basis, he's a really good passer. He's not a great ball handler, and that's really going to be what determines how far he can go as a point guard. But his passing and his playmaking, his vision is all really strong. I think that's going to be on display a lot with Ja out. And honestly, come May, could be a good thing that both Jaren and Desmond have gotten these reps as the primary ball handler, as the primary scorer in Jaren's case. Definitely could pay dividends down the road with those guys being more comfortable as the top option. But one more question on the Ja Morant suspension for you, Karna. I know we both think that Tyus Jones probably will be traded, but should the front office be more reluctant to trade Tyus Jones, given that Ja is already missing a third of the season and his injury history indicates that he'll probably miss more than that?
I mean, I think it largely depends. It depends on what you can get for him, if we're being honest. It's like a dynamic situation where, like, I think in a vacuum, yes, you should be a little bit more wary because Tyus Jones is a guy, he's a middling starter. Like, he could be a starter on probably not a championship winning team, but he can definitely serve as a starting point guard. In a conversation that we had kind of informally when the playoffs were happening and he was kind of going through his drought was that he seems more comfortable in a starting role. He feels more comfortable kind of controlling the tempo, determining the outcomes of the game from the start of the game. So I think he can have that mentality, step up to the plate, and really fill some of that playmaking role that Ja Morant has. Not the scoring. He's not going to fill it up. But you can run an offense to him as a traditional point guard. One thing I'm concerned about the Ja Morant suspension isn't necessarily Desmond and Jaren in a vacuum or Ja in a vacuum. It's what happens to that 10, 15 game transition period when Ja comes back that is concerning me from an X and O perspective. Because, I've been on my soapbox since we started this podcast about Ja making the guys around him functionally better. And we've seen the last two superstars, or two big superstars of our generation, Nikola Jokic and LeBron James, lead to sustained success doing that, making the players around them much better. I think there's been a lot of stopping and starting with these guys in their primes, where Ja Morant goes down for suspension or injury, Desmond Bane had his toe injury, Jaren has had intermittent issues, throughout the years. I want just one full season for these guys, and I'll even take the post 25 games. I want to see how they gel together. And I want the front office to do an honest assessment. Are these three guys the guys that you want to be your core? I think the answer is yes. I just don't think they've had the time to gel together well. It was really interesting. I was listening to a podcast, Gilbert Arenas' podcast, I believe it was, and he was telling us like NBA front offices these days don't allow teams to gel. They don't allow basketball chemistry to take its course. I think when Ja Morant comes back, what worries me is that 10 to 15 game period. Is there going to be chemistry issues? Are there going to be, because those games are going to be, once Ja Morant comes back, we need to have a very high winning percentage to have a good seed in the Western Conference. So I think those 10 to 15 games will be incredibly critical for the Grizzlies season and incredibly telling about how this Grizzlies will do in the playoffs, because they will face playoff atmospheres either on the road or even at home just to see Ja Morant come back. So that's my thought on the whole Ja Morant suspension is, I think these guys will gel well together, hopefully, if they're given time, but we need to give them that time, and there needs to be no interruptions and no distractions. And right now, we've seen both of those plague the Grizzlies.
Absolutely. And I feel like so many teams in the NBA could claim the same thing, that, man, if we could just get our stars all together for a full season, think about what they could do. I mean, this is literally the story of the Los Angeles Clippers in the Kawhi era. But it's also true for the Grizzlies. They've had a lot of stopping and starting, and even when they've had all three players on the court at the same time, Jaren, Dez, and Ja, it hasn't always been at their peak. Like, for example, Desmond was playing absolutely unreal basketball at the start of the season. Then he hurts his toe. Right after that, Jaren comes back. And when Desmond came back, a few games later, he wasn't quite the same player. So we haven't gotten to see all three of them at their peak for an extended period. Hopefully that will be coming after Ja's suspension. But I think that's it for us on the Ja suspension. Overall, it was a pretty lenient ruling by the NBA, even if I think it still should have been more lenient. And we await the appeal from the Players Association that could drop this thing down even farther. Again, 25 games is nothing if Ja Morant actually learns from this suspension, and if the Grizzlies continue to perform well with him off the court as they have the last couple seasons. But